Hello everyone. I'm pretty excited to meet you all as part of AWS Reinvent 2021. This is Bhuvneshwari Subramani here. I work for Infor as Director of Engineering Operations. I'm also an organizer of AWS User Group Bengaluru and AWS Hero from India since 2019. So by the end of the session, you will have a good understanding of how seamless it is to enable continuous integration and continuous delivery for your static website and also make it resilient. So here is our agenda. First, we will look at traditional static website hosting, source control management, and how you can leverage AWS Code Pipeline to have a seamless continuous delivery, and how Amazon S3 cross-region replication along with Amazon CloudFront Origin Group come in handy for you to building your resilient application. Let's get started with traditional static website hosting. So everything fails all the time is a famous quote from Dr. Werner Vogels, CTO and VP, Amazon, which brings in the simple truth that application will fail eventually and how prepared you are. How is that you're going to make that these failures will not impact your end users? So we are always making sure that the dynamic website or applications are designed with high availability and is resilient against such failures. I am here to say that let's apply the same principle and best practice to safeguard the static website as well. Basically, all that we need is to build the systems that embrace failure as a natural occurrence, even if we do not know what has caused that failure. So, with that, let's start looking at the traditional static website architecture. So, this is your architecture. You have happily hosted a static website on S3 bucket, and you have routed the traffic to custom domain using Amazon Route 53, which has given you high availability and scalability. Also added up the CloudFront to have the high speed delivery of your content. I repeat this statement. Also, we have added up CloudFront to speed up web content delivery and integrated with Amazon Certificate Manager for SSL enabling. So all set. Further, we have directed the logs from Amazon CloudFront and also from your static website to yet another bucket called logs bucket. So with this, do you mean is it complete? No, I don't think so. So there are a couple of challenges. So we'll see what are those challenges and how we are going to overcome that. So when you take up these challenges, change is a constant and static website contents also would keep changing. So do you have the traceability for your code, or have you set up dedicated environment for your staging and production for your static website? So have you set up continuous integration and continuous delivery? Is the disaster recovery in place? Is the application resilient for regional failure? I repeat the sentence. Is your website resilient for regional failure? So these are the challenges that we have to think and then ensure we address them as part of this implementation. So how are you going to do that? There are always opportunities for automating. So here what we see is to establish source control management system, to have continuous integration and continuous delivery for your application, and then ensure your application is resilient for regional failure. So these are the automation we are going to focus for the remaining of the session. So how an automation can tackle these challenges? First and foremost, when you're trying to set up the source control management system, it can take care of your changing content and also have traceability. The second thing, when you set up continuous integration and continuous delivery, and also you have a dedicated staging and production environment, you will be able to validate the changes on your staging environment before you take them live. And the next one is You set up cross-region replication to have your application to be resilient against regional failure. So now the first one, source control management. Whether you're writing a simple application or collaborating on a huge application at an enterprise level, spanned across geographies, irrespective of that, source control management is the vital component of your entire software development process. So let's follow the best practice laid out by the source control management for our static website too. By committing the code changes into your Bitbucket or GitHub, get the peer review done and ensure that there is a traceability for your code changes. So when we are talking about a source control management, you can use either AWS Code Commit, Bitbucket, GitHub, or anything that you're comfortable with and can be integrated very well. So, but make sure your static website code is on the source control management system. So now let's move on to your continuous integration and continuous delivery. So our CI/CD consists of 4 different stages. First is source, staging, approval, and then production. In the first stage of the pipeline, we pull the changes from the source control tool and then pass it on to the staging. In staging, what happens is you actually deploy the static content onto the staging environment S3 bucket. So once the static content is deployed to the staging environment, your website is ready. Now you can run the predefined functional validation suites written in UFT, or you might have written your load test as stress test using JMeter or LoadRunner. You can run those test suites, validate the application. If it is done, it is move on to the next stage, approval, where your approver or release manager is going to check your previous validation checklist or output. If he is fine with that, he is going to give a green signal. After that, it moves on to the production, where the application gets deployed to the production environment. Now we are set to go live. So now in all these stages, how would you ensure that continuous integration is in place? So our intention is to pull the code changes from the source control repository and then pass it on to the staging. So in order to do this, you make sure that you enable this option that whenever there is a code change that gets into the source control repository for the specific branch, this pipeline is automatically triggered so that your code changes will continue to move on and goes to the production seamlessly. This is the most important step. Okay. So now with this continuous delivery, we'll see what are the AWS CI/CD tools which will fit into this pipeline. In the first stage, when we take source from the AWS DevTools, we have AWS Code Commit. AWS Code Commit is the fully managed source control tool provided by AWS Cloud. And if you know Git already, that means you know 90% of AWS Code Commit. You don't have to worry about that. And the next stage, when you wanted to deploy to staging environment and then validate it, you have AWS Code Pipeline, which can be used to deploy the code changes to the AWS S3 bucket. Okay. And the next one is validation. You can use AWS Code Build, is yet another fully managed services to run the test suites, your predefined test suites, which you have written for UFT or LoadRunner or JMeter, can be invoked through AWS Code Build. Okay. So now all done. Approval, it is yet another action that you include as part of AWS Code Pipeline. So now after that, when you go on to production, it's the same services which you used for deploying to staging environment. You can leverage AWS Code Pipeline, deploy the code changes to your production environment. After that, you can use AWS Code Build to do the post-production deployment validation. So now we are done. The pipeline is established. You have bits and pieces, right? How all these services can be glued together. That is the responsibility of Amazon Code Pipeline again, which will help to link all these stages together. Now let's start looking at continuous delivery AWS architecture. In this, we have developers who are working on the static website content. Once they finish the development and they have the code changes ready, they can commit the changes to a designated branch in the source control repository. So you might be following your own branching guidelines. Here, if it is a feature-driven development methodology, we might have a separate branch for the developers to commit the code changes. And when they wanted to merge it to the master branch or the mainline branch, they can get the peer review done and then promote the code changes to the master branch. When it is all set to go live, when the code is in master branch, we have anyways have the automation in place. Whenever the change gets into the master branch, it's going to be pulled for deployment. So the source stage, that action in source stage will be keep watching the code changes in the master branch. It's going to pull the code changes, move that artifact onto the next stage, which is the staging. In staging, our code pipeline is going to deploy the code changes to the S3 bucket. Once it is deployed onto the S3 bucket, you can run your validation suites. You might have written your functional validation suite in UFDE, which can be used to run a quick smoke test. After you complete the quick smoke test, you can also run some kind of performance validation. Could be a load test or stress test using JMeter or LoadRunner. So now your validation is complete. Your metrics are available to the release manager for review. After the release manager is going to review your reports, he is going to give a green signal. Once the approval is in place, after the green signal, the pipeline automatically moves on deploying to the production environment. So the artifact code which is passed from the staging environment to the production environment will be pulled and deployed to the S3 bucket, which is available for the production environment. Now, when successfully deployed onto the production environment, you can have a predefined PDC, post-deployment checks or post-validations, whatever you call. So you can run those test suites to ensure that everything is in place and we are ready. The release was successful. So this is the entire pipeline which is going to help you in this process. So the source stage, the staging, approval, and deploy. These are the 4 different stages where our code moved from one stage to another and how it got deployed seamlessly. And the next one, how do we pass the artifacts in these stages? We don't have to do anything explicitly. The source action, which pulls the source code from the source control repository, internally passes the artifact as an output from source, which becomes an input to the next action staging. And from there on, it passes again to the production stage. This is how the artifact flows. So the source code pulled from the source control repository is moved on to be deployed for the production environment finally. So let's visualize the pipeline here. So we have source, deploy to staging, approval, and then deploy to production. These are the 4 different stages. Here, when a pipeline includes an approval action, basically an email notification will be sent to the approver. When the approver receives the email notification, see at this point in time, when you come from source, staging, and to approval, and when an email notification is triggered, that means the pipeline is halted at that stage. And it will resume again only when this pipeline receives a green signal from the approver or it would fail. So when it would fail, if the approver is going to click the reject and say the results are not satisfactory on the staging testing, so let me reject it. So if he does that, or if he does not respond for a period of 7 days for some reason, then only this pipeline will become failed. So you will have either success or failure out of this manual approval based on if the approver approves or rejects, or in other words, if the approver have not responded for 7 days, then the pipeline will become failed. So this is how a manual approval happens. So next thing is, let's talk about resiliency. How do you enable resiliency for static website? before even we get into resiliency, what is resiliency? Resiliency is the ability for a system to recover from failure which is induced by load, attack, or any natural failures. So here, let's talk about the architecture which we are going to build to replicate our static website. So when we take Amazon S3, it is highly available service and it is resilient for zonal failure, which means when we are creating an S3 bucket and going to use that for static website hosting, we would have chosen by default it's a standard class, and this standard storage class S3 bucket will have data replicated by default in 3 different availability zones. 3 or more availability zones, I would say. So when you have data replicated in multiple availability zones like this, by default, it is resilient for zonal failure. And how come we can make the application resilient for regional failure? That's going to be the challenge, right? So to make that happen, AWS Cloud might have a number of ways. And the one thing which we are going to discuss and deal with today is by having another S3 bucket as a disaster recovery S3 bucket. And we will use CloudFrame to redirect the traffic. Okay. So now as part of this solution, we are going to do 2 things. First thing, we would create an additional S3 bucket called dr.example.com. See, our main bucket is example.com as an example, and our disaster recovery bucket is dr.example.com. So we have created another bucket, but make sure this disaster recovery bucket is created in a different region because we are going to implement a resiliency for regional failure. So once you have created this S3 bucket, after that, you're going to create an origin group. So the origin group, what you're going to create is going to redirect the traffic from your source bucket to the destination bucket. So in order to do this, first you have to set up the replication from source to destination bucket. After you set up the replication from source to destination bucket, you would create an origin pointing to dr.example.com, and using these 2 origins, you will create an origin group. Okay. So now we'll move on to setting up replication from example.com to dr.example.com. So how are we going to do that? We are going to do that in 5 simple steps. The first one is you should create a replication rule and enable bucket versioning and configure the properties for source bucket in the replication rule, and then go and select the destination bucket. After that, click save, and then we are set to go. So the first and foremost step, creating the replication rule. So in this, you go to the source bucket, go to the management tab. That is, our source bucket here is example.com. Go to the management tab of the example.com source bucket, and then click the replication rules and go ahead and create replication by clicking this create replication rule button. So if you have not enabled versioning, then it is the time to do so, because you should have versioning enabled for your source and destination bucket before you enable the cross-region replication. So ensure you have enabled that. After you enable versioning as part of this particular window, you will get a green band like this, signaling that the enabling versioning is complete. And the next step is verify your source bucket. Source bucket, you're not selecting the source bucket because the changes or the replication rule that you're trying to create is actually on the source bucket itself. Fine. So after you your source bucket is selected, what we are going to do is, are we trying to filter any specific files that has to be covered as part of this replication, or you're going to apply this replication rule for all of the objects within this bucket. So for our purpose, we want all of the content in this S3 bucket to be replicated to dr.example.com. So I would choose the second option and then move forward. Then moving on to the destination bucket, what am I going to do in this destination bucket? I will choose the destination bucket which I'm going to use as a disaster recovery bucket. For our purpose demo, I have created dr.example.com in my account itself. So I will point to that. In case if you wanted to redirect to a S3 bucket created in some other account, we should be able to do so at this point in time. Okay. So once we have configured those things, finally we are all set. Go save and we are ready to go. Right? So now we have created the replication rule. All green, right? Happy. So we are ready with the replication rule. So one important thing that we'll have to pay attention is how the objects will be replicated. So most of the objects gets replicated within 15 minutes, but sometimes the replication can take a couple of hours also. So for mission critical applications, what is recommended is enable replication time control. So which you can see it actually in the previous screen, we have replication time control RTC. So I would recommend if your website or the application that you're hosting is mission critical, go ahead and enable this replication time control. This will help us rest assured that 99.99% of the new objects are replicated within 15 minutes, and also you will be provided with replication metrics and notifications. So that's going to be really helpful and handy. So if you want the data to be replicated and you need to have a traceability and metrics, everything is in place, it's recommended to enable this. The next step what we are going to do is creating origin group. So first, when we created the S3 bucket and hosted it as a static website and redirected via CloudFront, what we would have done, we would have gone and created an origin within the CloudFront under web distribution. So when you're creating the origin, you would have chosen the source bucket, created the origin, configured, you might have enabled SSL, integration is done, fine, it was running so far. So now we are here to set up the disaster recovery. As part of this, we'll have to create one more origin pointing to our disaster recovery bucket, which is dr.example.com. So once you create this origin, so make sure you choose the appropriate bucket, that is dr.example.com, its domain name. And then what is recommended again here is to enable OAI, Origin Access Identity. So this Origin Access Identity is very important to ensure that your website content, the S3 bucket content, is accessed and delivered only via CloudFront, and nobody will have direct access to the content of this S3 bucket. So also you click S for the option where you want this origin itself to go ahead and update your bucket policy by applying this particular OAI rule, Origin Access Identity rule, to your bucket policy. So this will save some time for you. So once you create this second origin, which is going to point to your disaster recovery bucket, move on to the next step where you have to create an origin group. So in this origin group, you would create your primary bucket, that is example.com, as your primary origin, and your secondary bucket, which is going to be your disaster recovery bucket, dr.example.com in our case, will be our secondary. This order of execution is very important because based on this order only, the CloudFront origin group is going to redirect the traffic. So first what it will do is, whenever the traffic is coming, if the example.com, the primary is active, it's going to send the traffic there. If at all is primary is inactive, it would redirect the traffic to the secondary. And when would it redirect? When would it assume that there is a failure and it has to redirect? So that will happen when any of these errors occurs. So I have chosen 500 internal error, 502 bad gateway, all of these errors, when any one of these error occurs, if there is a permission issue, all that, then it is going to redirect the traffic to the dr.example.com. So that is our setting. So now we have created the origin group with an ultimate goal is to remove a single point of failure and implement the automatic detection of failure, and we have configured a redundant path to establish the business continuity, because that's our ultimate goal, right? Okay, so now we are done. What next? So we have set up the CI/CD in place, we have set up the disaster recovery, everything is happening, but we'll have to test. Right now it's a time to test the resiliency. So how are we going to test if your website is resilient for regional failure? You cannot go ahead and shut down everything in one region, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to update the S3 bucket policy for example.com, that is our source bucket, where you have hosted the static website, to deny the access for CloudFront. Okay, so after you do that, we are going to test if the CloudFront is redirecting the traffic from your example.com to dr.example.com. That's what we are going to test as part of this. Okay, let's move on. And as part of this, here is the OAI, Origin Access Identity policy, which is updated for your bucket. You remember when we created the origin in the CloudFront, we have enabled an option to set up origin access identity, and we have also enabled that CloudFront, you go and update the bucket policy there. So the CloudFront has updated the bucket policy. What we are doing now is I'm going to change the allow effect for this particular bucket policy example.com to deny. That is, CloudFront can no longer access the S3 bucket content. That's what we're going to do it. And then we'll see whether the website is still going to be up and running. It still works. So what has happened? The redirection have actually worked because I have shut the path in the primary bucket, that is example.com, but the redirection is happening to the secondary. So we are still able to see our static website get delivered. So the resiliency is working from one region to another region. Now, further, we'll have to verify, okay, whatever we have set is fine, right? So we wanted to do one more validation. We wanted to go and update the bucket policy of your dr.example.com, the disaster recovery S3 bucket, also to deny access to CloudFront, and see what happens. So I have edited the bucket policy for dr.example.com to change the effect from allow to deny. Now go ahead and browse your website to see if you're able to see. Oh no, it breaks. Yes, you've got the access denied error, because with the CloudFront, when the traffic is coming in, first it will try to send it to the primary S3 bucket, which is example.com. It has got a failure error. We have set up the origin group to redirect the traffic from example.com to dr.example.com. So the redirection happens here. So after the redirection happens, if it goes and hits dr.example.com, there also we have changed the effect to deny. So it's getting denied in both the places. Where else it can go? Let's have a look at the resources. I'm going to share some additional resources for you. I'm happy to share that one of my blog got featured in AWS Heroes Content Library, CI/CDs for a static website hosted on Amazon S3. Not just mine, there are plenty of learning libraries, workshops, videos, blogs, all that are available on AWS Heroes Content Library. Please have a look. And I have also shared a couple of other blogs which are on Dev2 written by me. So to host a static website on S3, to set up CI/CD for static website hosted on Amazon S3, and also how to enable resiliency for a static website hosted on Amazon S3. So here are a couple of links for you to go through. Similar to a dynamic or large-scale application, let's ensure to have continuous integration and continuous delivery for a static website as well, and ensure that the website is resilient for natural or regional failures. Thank you so much for listening.